I turned 33 in the rented upstairs room of a bistro, begging the universe for a quiet night. My mother, Marlene, had other plans. When she tapped her champagne flute and announced to the entire party that she had adopted me solely for the tax write-offs, she expected laughter. Instead, the room died. She thought she was telling a charming anecdote about her own generosity. She didn't realize she had just handed me the shovel to dig up her grave. The tablecloth was a heavy linen, the color of unbleached parchment, and I found myself smoothing the same wrinkle near the edge for the third time in 5 minutes. It was my 33rd birthday, and I had curated this evening with the desperate precision of a bomb disposal technician trying to keep a wire from tripping. The upstairs room of the Gilded Anchor was small, intimate, and importantly, private. I had chosen it because the acoustics were soft, absorbing sound rather than amplifying it. I wanted a dinner where voices stayed low and laughter felt genuine, not performed. I wanted to look across the table at Jonah and see his actual face, not the guarded mask he wore whenever my mother was in the room. Jonah placed his hand over mine, stopping my fingers from working the fabric. "You are doing it again." "Stella," he said, his voice a low rumble that usually settled my nerves. "Doing what?" I asked, though I knew. "Rehearsing," he said. "You are practicing your face. You are checking the exits. Marlene has not even parked her car yet, and you are already managing her." I pulled my hand away gently and picked up my water glass. The condensation felt cold and grounding against my fingertips. "I am just making sure everything is ready." I said, "It is a milestone. Apparently, 33, the Jesus year. I just want it to be nice." Jonah sighed, leaning back in his chair. The wood creaked. He looked handsome in the navy button-down I had bought him, but there was a tension in his shoulders that mirrored my own. We had been engaged for 6 months, and in that time, he had learned that loving me meant navigating the minefield of my history with Marlene Hayes. "Do not take the bait tonight." "Jonah," I said, keeping my voice low as the first few guests began to drift in near the doorway. "Please, if she starts with the comments about your job or the apartment size, just let it slide. She wants a reaction. If you give her one, she wins. I know the drill." "Stella," he said, though his jaw was set tight. "I just hate watching you shrink." "I am not shrinking," I said, forcing the corners of my mouth up into the neutral, pleasant smile I had perfected somewhere around the age of 12. "I am enduring. There is a difference." My best friend, Priya, arrived then, bringing a gust of the cool, salty Fairhaven air with her. She looked radiant in emerald green, shaking off an umbrella before making a beeline for me. She hugged me tight, smelling of rain and expensive vanilla perfume. "Happy birthday." "Darling," she whispered against my ear. I saw a black Mercedes parking aggressively in the loading zone downstairs. I assumed the Queen has arrived? I felt my stomach tighten, a reflex I had never quite outgrown. "She is early," I said. "She is never early. She wants to catch you off guard," Priya said, pulling back and looking me over. "You look beautiful. That blue is your color. Keep your shoulders back. Do not let her see you bleed." It was a joke, mostly, but the advice was sincere. In Fairhaven Harbor, appearances were currency, and Marlene was a billionaire. She had spent 3 decades crafting the image of the benevolent, sophisticated matriarch, a woman who had raised a daughter alone while navigating the treacherous waters of local society. I was the supporting character in her biopic, the grateful daughter who existed to prove her martyrdom. The stairs creaked loudly, silencing the chatter in the room. Marlene did not just enter a room. She breached it. She swept in wearing a coat that cost more than my car, a structured thing of camel hair and silk, with a silk scarf knotted artfully at her throat. But it was not just her. Behind her trailed a man I did not recognize, laden with camera equipment, and a younger woman struggling with a portable projector screen. My simple, intimate dinner had just been invaded. "Happy birthday, baby!" Marlene's voice boomed, projecting to the back row of an imaginary theater. She crossed the room with her arms outstretched. bypassing Jonah entirely to envelop me in a cloud of heavy floral scent and cold air. She kissed the air next to my cheek, her hands firm on my upper arms, holding me in place rather than hugging me. "Mom," I said, stepping back slightly. "Who are these people?" "Oh, hush. Do not be rude," Marlene said, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "This is David. He is a brilliant photographer. Just brilliant. I wanted to capture the night properly, and the screen is for a little surprise. You know I cannot let my only girl turn 33 without a little fanfare. We talked about this," I said, my voice dropping to a hush so the guests settling into their seats would not hear. "I said no productions, just dinner. Stella." "Honestly," Marlene sighed, her smile never wavering, though her eyes went hard and flat, like shark eyes. "You are being ungrateful. I am trying to make it special. Do not ruin this for me." The phrasing was automatic. "Do not ruin this for me. Not for us. Not for me." The birthday girl? For her? I felt Jonah step up beside me, his presence a warm wall of heat. "Mrs. Hayes," Jonah said, polite but firm. "We really just wanted a quiet evening. Maybe the photographer can—" Marlene turned her gaze on him, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Jonah, sweetheart," she said, her tone dripping with faux affection. "If you cannot afford a photographer for your fiancé, you should be thanking me for stepping up." Again, Jonah opened his mouth, but I shot him a look. "Do not—" "It is fine," I said, the words tasting like ash. "It is fine. Let's just sit down." The dinner proceeded with the agonizing friction of a dragged anchor. The food was excellent, roasted sea bass and truffled risotto, but I barely tasted it. Marlene dominated the conversation from the head of the table, a spot she had usurped from Jonah. She told stories that were technically about me but were actually about her. How hard it was to find the right private school. How she had sacrificed her social life to drive me to cello lessons I hated. How she had single-handedly managed my teenage rebellion. Every story was polished, a smooth stone she had rubbed for years until it had no sharp edges, only the weight of her own virtue. I kept my phone face down on the table, my hand resting on the back of the case. I focused on the texture of the linen napkin in my lap. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Around the time the dessert plates were being cleared, Marlene stood up. She picked up a teaspoon and chimed it against her champagne flute. The sound was sharp, piercing the low hum of conversation. "Attention, everyone," she called out. "If I could just have a moment, please." "No," I whispered, staring at my plate. Priya, sitting to my left, reached under the table and squeezed my knee. I looked at her and saw the concern in her eyes. She had noticed my hand trembling as I reached for my water glass. I set the glass down quickly, interlacing my fingers to hide the tremor. Marlene signaled the man with the projector. The lights in the room were dimmed by a waiter who had clearly been tipped heavily to cooperate. On the portable screen, a montage of photos began to play, set to a saccharine, overproduced ballad about a mother's love. There was me as a toddler, looking confused in a frilly dress. Me at 10, holding a violin I couldn't play. Me at graduation, looking exhausted. "Whatever you think you know about raising a child," Marlene began, her voice pitching into her practiced public speaking register, "you do not know the half of it until you do it alone." She paused for effect. The room was silent. My friends were polite people. They looked at the screen, smiling awkwardly. "Stella has always been a project," Marlene said, chuckling as if inviting everyone in on the joke. "A beautiful, complicated project, but I suppose that is what you get when you take on a challenge." I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. Take on a challenge. She turned to look at me, her face flushed with wine and the intoxication of holding court. "You know, I do not talk about this often," Marlene said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial stage whisper that carried to every corner of the room, "because I never wanted Stella to feel different. I wanted her to feel just like one of us." Jonah shifted in his chair, the wood groaning, But when we finalized the paperwork, Marlene continued, gesturing vaguely with her glass, my accountant looked at me and said, Marlene, are you sure? This is a liability. And I looked him right in the eye and said, well, at least the tax benefits will help offset the cost of her braces. She laughed. A loud, bright, singular sound. A few guests gave polite, confused chuckles, thinking it was a metaphorical joke about the cost of parenting, but Marlene was not done. She wanted the punchline to land harder. No, truly, she exclaimed, looking around the room, beaming. Let's be honest. I adopted Stella for the tax benefits. That was the only way the math worked out back then. But, I ended up loving her anyway, so it was a win-win. The laughter that had started to bubble up died instantly. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. The silence that followed was not the respectful silence of a toast. It was the horrified, vacuum-packed silence of a car crash. I sat frozen. The words hung in the air, vibrating. Adopted, tax benefits, loved her anyway. I had never been told I was adopted. I had been raised with the story that my father died before I was born. A tragic, fleeting romance Marlene had while traveling in Europe. It was the foundational myth of our two-person family. Marlene the widow, Stella the orphan. I looked at her. She was still smiling, holding her glass up, waiting for the applause. She looked radiant, pleased with her own benevolence. She genuinely did not see the horror on the faces of my friends. She thought she was being charmingly self-deprecating. Jonah's chair scraped loudly against the floorboards as he stood up. His fists were clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. That is enough, he said, his voice shaking with rage. Marlene blinked, looking at him as if he were a heckler at a comedy show. Oh, lighten up. Jonah, she said, it is ancient history. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was not the hysteria I would have expected. It was not tears. It was a sudden, crystalline stillness. It was the feeling of a lens snapping into focus after years of being slightly blurred, the odd discrepancies in my medical history, the lack of baby pictures before the age of 2, the way Marlene sometimes looked at me not with a mother's warmth, but with a collector's appraisal, the way my grandmother Evelyn had always squeezed my hand too hard, as if trying to transfer a secret through her skin. I stood up. My legs felt solid. My heartbeat, which had been racing all night, slowed to a heavy, deliberate thud. Jonah, I said. He looked down at me, his face twisted with the need to protect me, to shout, to flip the table. Sit down, I said. Stella, he breathed. Please, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried, do not make a scene. He hesitated, then slowly sank back into his chair, his eyes never leaving Marlene. Marlene looked between us, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. She sensed she had lost the room, but she did not understand why. She lowered her glass. Well, she said, a slight edge to her voice. I thought it was funny. You all have no sense of humor. I did not look at her. I could not look at her. If I looked at her, I might vomit, or I might scream, and I refused to do either. I pushed my chair back. Excuse me, I said to the table at large. I walked out of the room. I walked with my head high, past the waiter who was staring at the floor, past the photographer who had lowered his camera, looking embarrassed. I went into the narrow hallway that led to the restrooms. It was dimly lit, the walls covered in vintage nautical maps. I leaned against the wall next to a map of the coastline and pulled my phone from my clutch. My fingers were cold, but they did not shake. I dialed Dr. Aris. It was 9 o'clock at night. I knew she would not answer. I needed the voicemail. I needed to hear the beep. You have reached the voicemail of Dr. Aris. Please leave a message. I pressed the phone to my ear, closing my eyes. I am not dissolving. I whispered into the receiver. I am standing in a hallway. I am 33 years old. I am anchoring. She just told a room full of people I was a tax write-off. I am not dissolving. I hung up. I took a deep breath. smelling the lavender soap from the restroom and the faint scent of old paper. I turned around and walked back into the party room. The conversation had not resumed. Everyone was staring at their plates or whispering furiously. Marlene was sitting at the head of the table, looking aggressively at her phone, scrolling as if she were bored. I walked to the head of the table. I did not sit down. "Thank you all for coming," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a stranger. "I am afraid I'm not feeling well. I am going to head home. Please, stay and enjoy the dessert. The crème brûlée is supposedly excellent." "Stella," Marlene snapped, looking up. "Do not be dramatic. You are not leaving your own party." I looked at her then. I really looked at her. I saw the lines of filler around her mouth, the tightness of her jaw, the fear behind her eyes that had nothing to do with losing me and everything to do with losing control of the narrative. "Good night, Marlene," I said. I signaled to Jonah. He was up in an instant, grabbing my coat and his own. We walked out. We left her there with the bill, the photographer, and the silence she had created. The drive home was silent. Jonah drove with both hands on the wheel. 10 and 2, his jaw tight. The rain had started again, smearing the streetlights into long, blurred streaks on the windshield. When we got to our apartment, I went straight to the bedroom. I did not turn on the main light. I knelt on the floor and pulled the plastic storage bin from under the bed. "Stella?" Jonah asked from the doorway. He sounded scared. "I am okay," I said. "I just need to check something." I opened the bin. It was full of the detritus of my childhood, the things I had saved because Marlene had thrown everything else away. She was not sentimental about the past. She preferred to curate the present. I dug through the layers, old art projects, a participation ribbon from a swim meet, and then the file folder. I opened it. There were my report cards. Stella is a quiet student. Stella needs to participate more. There was the copy of my birth certificate. I had needed it for a passport when I was 21. I pulled it out. I had looked at this document a dozen times, but I had never seen it. I looked at the date of issue. It was not the year of my birth. It was dated 4 years later. Delayed registration of birth. I flipped through the other papers. There was a savings bond from my grandmother, Evelyn, and taped to the back of the bond was a small, brass key. It was an old safety deposit box key. On the tape, in Evelyn's shaky, cursive handwriting, were the initials E.H. I peeled the tape back and held the key in my palm. It was heavy, cold metal. I closed my eyes, and the memory came rushing back. It was 3 days before Evelyn died. I was 26. She was in the hospice bed in her living room, small and frail, her skin like tissue paper. Marlene had gone out to get coffee, complaining about the smell of the medicine. Evelyn had grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Stella," she had rasped. "Listen to me. I'm here, Grandma," I had said. "If she ever does it," Evelyn whispered, her eyes wide and watery. "If Marlene ever humiliates you in public, if she ever pushes you too far, it is because she is afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked. "Afraid you will ask the right questions," Evelyn said. "Use the key. Stella, when you are ready," at the time. I thought it was the morphine talking. I thought she was confused. I squeezed the key in my hand until the edges bit into my skin. She wasn't confused. I said aloud. Jonah stepped into the room and sat on the floor beside me. He didn't touch me. He just sat there, witnessing. "What?" he asked. "She told everyone I was adopted for tax benefits," I said, staring at the key. "She framed it as a joke, but Marlene doesn't tell jokes. Jonah, she tells versions of the truth that serve her." I looked at the birth certificate again. "She is afraid," I said, "and I am going to find out why." The next morning, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with unspent rain. I called in sick to the architectural firm where I worked as a project manager. I had never called in sick in 5 years. I drove to the county seat, a 40-minute drive from Fairhaven Harbor. I didn't go to the main government center. I went to a place I had found online at 3 in the morning, Harborline Document Archives. It was a private service that specialized in retrieving difficult records, genealogy, property disputes, closed adoption files. The office was in a strip mall, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a vape shop. It smelled of stale coffee and toner dust. The clerk was a man in his 50s wearing a sweater vest that had seen better days. He looked at me over the rim of his spectacles. "I need to find my adoption decree," I said. I placed my driver's license and the delayed birth certificate on the counter. "Name?" he asked, typing into a computer that looked like it was running an operating system from the 90s. "Stella Hayes," I said. "Born May 12th, 1992. He typed, clicked, frowned, typed again. He took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You said adoption?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "My mother announced it last night. I need to see the original paperwork." He turned the screen slightly away from me. A reflexive move of protection. "Ms. Hayes," he said slowly, "we have access to the county index. If there was a formal adoption finalized in this county, or even in the state, there would be a seal on the file, or a reference marker." "And?" I asked. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "There is nothing," he said. "What do you mean, nothing?" "I mean, there is no record of an adoption for a Stella Hayes, or a Stella of that birth date, in 1992 or anywhere near it. Maybe it was private?" I asked. "A private arrangement? Even private adoptions have a paper trail." He said, "There is a petition, a decree, a name change." He tapped the birth certificate I had brought. "This," he said, pointing to the delayed registration stamp. "This is unusual. This is usually what happens when a child is born at home." Or what?" I asked. "Or when the paperwork is filed retroactively to correct a discrepancy." He said. He looked at me with a pity that made my skin crawl. "If you were adopted, Ms. Hayes, the state of North Cascadia does not seem to know about it." I walked out of the shop feeling lightheaded. The world felt tilted, as if the gravity had shifted. I was sitting in my car, staring at the steering wheel, when my phone buzzed. Mom. The picture on the screen was one I had taken of her at a gala. Smiling, elegant, untouchable. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I slid my finger across the screen. "Hello," I said. "Stella." Her voice was shrill, brittle. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? "I didn't say anything, leaving before dessert?" Marlene continued, her voice gaining speed. "David was going to take a group photo. The Clays were there. The Millers. You made me look like I raised a distinct lack of manners. You told them I was a tax write-off. Marlene," I said. "Oh, stop it," she snapped. "It was a joke. I was being charming. Everyone was laughing until you and your moody fiancé decided to suck the joy out of the room. I was trying to show them how much I overcame to raise you." I listened to her breathing on the other end. Short, angry puffs of air. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask if I was hurt. She was talking about the Clays and the Millers. She was talking about the group photo. She wasn't worried that she had broken my heart. She was worried that I had broken her scene. "You know what, Mom?" I said. "What?" she demanded. "I hope the tax benefits were worth it." I said. I hung up the phone. I sat there in the silence of my car. The hurt that had been a physical ache in my chest since the night before began to recede. It was replaced by something colder, something harder. Marlene had spent my entire life building a fortress of lies. She thought she was safe inside it. She thought I was just a brick in the wall. I reached into my purse and touched the cold metal of Evelyn's key. I started the engine. I wasn't going home. I was going to the bank. Seabright Federal Credit Union was a relic of a different era in Fairhaven Harbor, a building made of heavy gray stone that smelled of floor wax and old currency. It was the kind of place where the tellers still knew your name, or at least pretended to. I walked in with my grandmother's key burning a hole in my pocket. The metal warm against my palm. I had not slept. My eyes felt gritty, and the adrenaline that had carried me out of the bistro the night before had curdled into a low, humming anxiety. I requested access to Box 412. The bank manager, a woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, checked my identification against a signature card that Evelyn must have updated years ago, adding me as a co-signer without ever telling me. It was just like Evelyn to be prepared for her own absence. The vault was cool and silent. The manager left me alone in a small viewing room with a table and a single chair. I placed the long metal box on the table. It was heavy, the steel cold under my fingertips. I inserted the key. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no jewelry, no stacks of cash, no heirlooms. There was just a large manila envelope, sealed with tape that had yellowed with age, and a thick stack of papers bound by a rubber band that had long since snapped and stuck to the documents. I picked up the envelope first. On the front, in Evelyn's shaky, distinctive cursive, was written, "For Stella, when the time is right." My hands trembled as I tore it open. A single sheet of lined notebook paper fell out. It was dated 6 months before Evelyn died. "My dearest Stella," it began. "If you are reading this, it means Marlene has finally done something unforgivable. I always prayed she wouldn't. I prayed that her need to control the narrative would keep you safe. But I know your mother. Her vanity is a dangerous thing. You need to know that I never believed the story about the adoption. Marlene told everyone she went to Europe and came back with a baby she saved from a poor orphanage. And later she changed it to a domestic adoption when the details didn't add up. But I know my own daughters. There was never an agency. Stella, there was never a lawyer in Paris or a social worker in Seattle. There was only your aunt, Liana." I stopped reading. The air in the small room felt suddenly thin. Liana. I knew the name, but only as a whisper. Marlene rarely spoke of her sister. Liana was the family tragedy, the wild one, the one who had run off to California in the early 90s and never came back. Marlene used Liana as a cautionary tale whenever I wanted to dye my hair or stay out late. "Do not end up like your aunt," she would say. I forced myself to read on. Liana was in trouble. Stella, deep trouble. She came back to Fairhaven in 1992. Terrified. She was hiding from someone, or something. Marlene took her in. But she didn't do it for charity. Marlene saw an opportunity. She always does. Then Liana vanished again. Marlene told me she had gone to a facility, that she wasn't fit to be a mother, and that she had signed you over to Marlene to give you a better life. I wanted to fight her. I wanted to find Liana. But Marlene had the lawyers, the money, and the terrifying ability to make people believe whatever she said. She told me if I pushed it, you would end up in the foster system. She held you hostage to keep me quiet. I am a coward. Stella. I let her win because I wanted you to have a home, but I kept copies. I stole what I could from her home office when she wasn't looking. I don't know if it is enough to prove the truth, but it is enough to start asking. Forgive me for not being brave enough to tell you while I was alive. Love, Grandma. I put the letter down. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were floating near the ceiling, looking down at the woman sitting at the table. Liana, my aunt, my mother. I reached for the stack of papers. The first document was a photocopy of a guardianship order. It looked official at first glance, but as I studied it, the formatting seemed off. The margins were uneven, as if it had been typed on a typewriter that was misaligned. It was dated October 14th, 1994. Temporary guardianship granted to Marlene Hayes, not adoption, guardianship, and the signature at the bottom, Liana Hart. The handwriting was jagged, erratic, pressing so hard the pen had nearly torn through the paper even in the photocopy. Next to it was a notarization stamp. Beatrice Knowlton, Notary Public. The commission expiration date was blurry, but I squinted at it. It looked like the stamp had been expired at the time of the signing. I flipped through the rest. There were tax returns, copies of Marlene's schedule, A and dependent listings from 1995, 1996, and 1997. I ran my finger down the columns. In 95, I was listed as Stella Hayes. Daughter. In 96, I was listed as Stella Hart. Niece/dependent. In 97, I was back to daughter. The Social Security number listed for me in 96 was different by one digit from the one in 95. It was sloppy. It was incredibly, arrogantly sloppy. It was the paperwork of someone who knew no one would ever audit them because they were rich, connected, and white in a town where those three things were a shield against scrutiny. Marlene had stood up at my birthday party and joked about tax benefits. I realized with a sick, cold certainty that she hadn't been joking. She had been bragging. She had shuffled me around on paper like a shell corporation to maximize her returns or hide assets. I gathered the papers and put them back in the box. Keeping the photocopies and the letter in my bag, I locked the box. I walked out of the bank and into the gray daylight. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with mist. I sat in my car and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was not an orphan. I was a niece. I was a daughter of a woman who had been erased, and Marlene had known every single day of my life. I did not go to the police. I did not go to Marlene's house to scream at her. I went to a quiet office building on the edge of the business district. Dana Mercer was an employment and family law attorney recommended by a friend of a friend. She was not the most expensive lawyer in town. Marlene had those on retainer, but she was known for being meticulous and terrifyingly calm. I sat in her office, which was lined with books and smelled of peppermint tea. I laid the photocopies out on her desk. Dana read the letter from Evelyn twice. She studied the tax returns with a magnifying glass she pulled from her drawer. She was silent for a long time. Finally, she looked up at me. She had sharp, intelligent eyes and wore a blazer that looked comfortable rather than imposing. "You need to understand what you are looking at." "Stella," she said, "tell me." I said, "If this letter is true, and if these documents are authentic copies, you were never adopted." Dana said, "Adoption is a total severance of legal ties with the biological parents and the creation of a new legal entity. It seals the old records. It creates a new birth certificate. It is final. And this?" I pointed to the guardianship paper. "This is a custodial arrangement," she said. "Guardianship is usually temporary. It does not sever the biological mother's rights permanently unless there is a specific court order terminating them. If Marlene claimed you as an adopted child on her taxes, but only had guardianship papers, that is federal tax fraud." She tapped the inconsistent Social Security numbers. "And this," she added, "looks like she was trying to obscure your identity to avoid flagging the system. Or perhaps she was claiming benefits for you under two different identities." I felt a wave of nausea. My mother, Marlene, announced at my birthday party that she adopted me for the tax benefits. I said quietly. Dana's eyebrows shot up. "She said that? In public?" "Yes." Dana leaned back in her chair. "People like your mother," she said carefully, "often mistake immunity for invincibility. She has likely gotten away with this for so long she forgot it was a crime. She framed it as a quirky anecdote." "What do I do?" I asked. "Do I sue her?" "No," Dana said immediately. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because right now, all you have is a letter from a deceased grandmother and some photocopies that could be dismissed as forgeries or drafts." Dana explained. "If you confront Marlene now, she will destroy whatever original records exist. She will claim Evelyn was senile. She will claim you are unstable. She has the money to bury you in litigation for the next 10 years. She leaned forward. "We need proof. Stella, indisputable, hard proof. We need the original chain of custody. We need to know where Liana Hart went. We need to know why the state thinks you were born 4 years after you were born." "So I do nothing?" I asked, frustration bubbling up. "No. You investigate," Dana said, "but you do it quietly. You are a spy in your own life now. Do not let her know you know. Let her think you are just sulking about the party. Let her think she won." She handed the papers back to me. "I want you to contact the Vital Records office in the Capitol," she instructed. "Request your long-form birth certificate, not the decorative one, the one with the file history, and do not use your mother's contacts. Do it yourself." I took the afternoon off work again. I told my boss I had a family emergency, which was technically the truest thing I had ever said. I sat in my apartment, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the hold music for the North Cascadia Department of Health, Center for Health Statistics. Finally, a clerk answered, "I would like to request a copy of my original, pre-adoption birth certificate," I said, trying to sound like I did this every day. "Name?" the clerk asked. "Stella Hayes." There was a long pause, the sound of typing. "Ma'am," the clerk said, her voice changing tone, "I am seeing a restricted amendment history on this file." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means the original record was sealed and amended by court order, but it is not coded as a standard adoption." The clerk said, "It is coded under a hierarchical seal." "A what?" "It means I cannot access the original without a court order from a judge," she explained. "The record was changed, but the underlying file is locked." "Who locked it?" I asked. "I cannot see that," she said. "But usually, this happens in cases involving witness protection, or what? Or high-level ward of the state cases where the identity needs to be protected." I hung up. My hands were shaking. Witness protection? Ward of the state? Marlene was a socialite in a mid-sized coastal city. She organized charity galas and complained about the quality of lobster bisque. She was not involved in high-level government conspiracies, or was she? Jonah came home at 6. He took one look at me sitting on the sofa in the dark and dropped his gym bag. "Stella," he said. He came over and sat next to me. He looked angry, still carrying the rage from the party. "I am going to go over there," he said. "I am going to tell her to stay the hell away from us." "No," I said. "Why?" he demanded. "She humiliated you. She lied to you." I told him about the bank box. I told him about the letter from Evelyn. I told him about the notary stamp and the tax fraud. He sat in silence, his face paling as the gravity of it sank in. "So she is not just a narcissist," he said. "She is a criminal. She might be." I said, "Then we go to the police," Jonah said. Standing up, "We nail her. Jonah, sit down." I said. He looked at me, frustrated. "Why are you so calm?" he asked. "You should be screaming. You should be burning her house down." "Because if I burn it down, I burn with it," I said. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rainy street. "If I blow this up now," I said, "she spins it. She says I am crazy. She says I am ungrateful. She has the foundation, the friends, the money. She controls the narrative. If I want to beat her, I have to be smarter than her." I turned to him. "I do not want revenge. Jonah, not the way you think. I do not want to scream at her in a restaurant. I want to know who I am. I want to know what happened to Liana. And I want to know why Marlene felt she had the right to steal my life." Jonah looked at me for a long time, then he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "We do it your way. But if she comes near you, I am not staying quiet." The next few days were a blur of paranoia. Every time my phone rang, I jumped. Priya came over on Thursday with a bottle of wine and a determined look on her face. "Okay," she said, pouring 2 glasses. "I have been thinking. We need to handle this." "Handle it how?" I asked. "We could blast her," Priya said. "My friend Sarah runs that local gossip blog, The Harbor View. We could anonymously tip her about the tax benefit comment. It would go viral in this town in 10 minutes. Marlene would be a pariah at the country club." I shook my head immediately. "No, why not?" Priya asked. "She deserves it. Because I do not want strangers to be my jury," I said. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted sour. "If I put this online, it becomes entertainment," I said. "People will take sides. They will dissect my life. They will make memes. Marlene loves attention, even bad attention. She will play the victim. She will cry on Instagram." I looked at Priya. "This is not content. Priya, this is my life." Priya softened. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "I get it," she said. "I just want to hurt her for you." "I know," I said, "and I love you for it, but I have to do this the hard way." Later that night, another friend, Chloe, texted me. "OMG Stella, I am so sorry about the party. You should totally post about it on TikTok. Toxic mom checks are huge right now. You could get like 1 million views." I deleted the text without replying. The temptation was there. It would be so easy to burn Marlene down with a single post, to let the internet mob tear her apart, but that was Marlene's game. Performance, audience, applause. I wanted facts. I wanted the truth. Cold and hard and undeniable. It was late Friday night when the email came. I was sitting at my kitchen island, cross-referencing the dates from the tax returns with Marlene's old calendars, which I had saved from the trash years ago because I am a hoarder of memories. My laptop pinged. I opened my inbox. It was an email from a generic, encrypted address, truthseeker 88 protonmail .com. The subject line was, "It wasn't just taxes." My heart stopped. I clicked on it. Stella. I was at the bistro. I was the waiter pouring the water when your mother spoke. I used to work for the Fairhaven Family Promise Foundation back in the late 90s. Your mother's story is a mask. She didn't just use you for tax benefits. It was bigger than that. If you are looking for Liana, and you should be, start with the Foundation's old Guardian Relief Grant files from 1994 and 95. Look for the payments made to internal support. She didn't adopt you. She hid you, and she got paid to do it. Be careful. The Foundation protects its own. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked at me. A steady, rhythmic pulse. Fairhaven Family Promise Foundation. It was the premier charity in our city. It funded homeless shelters, after-school programs, food banks. Marlene had been involved with it for as long as I could remember. She was always chairing their galas, hosting their silent auctions. I opened a new tab and typed in the Foundation's URL. The website was sleek, filled with photos of smiling children and diverse families. I clicked on the Our Team page. There was the executive director, the board of directors. And there, listed under honorary patrons and founding donors, was a photo of Marlene. She was wearing white, smiling benevolently, holding a bouquet of roses. Marlene Hayes, patron. I scrolled down to the history section. Founded in 1993 to support families in crisis. 1993. 1 year before the guardianship paper was signed. 1 year after I was born. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Marlene hadn't just told a lie. She had built an institution. She had created a charity to launder her own secrets. I thought about the grant files the email mentioned. Guardian Relief. If Marlene had received grants to take care of me, her own niece, while claiming to be a wealthy philanthropist, then the hypocrisy was not just moral, it was structural. I picked up my phone and took a picture of the screen. Then I forwarded the email to Dana. I stood up and paced the kitchen. The linoleum was cold under my bare feet. Evelyn was right. Marlene was afraid. She wasn't afraid of me asking about my father. She was afraid of me asking about the money. She was afraid of me pulling a thread that would unravel not just her family life, but her entire social standing, her legacy, her freedom. I walked to the window. The lights of Fairhaven Harbor twinkled in the distance, beautiful and deceptive. You built a castle on a swamp, Mom. I whispered to the glass, and I am going to find the drain. I slept fitfully that night. I dreamed I was a little girl again, hiding in the pantry while Marlene entertained guests in the kitchen. In the dream, the guests weren't people. They were tax forms with mouths, laughing at me. When I woke up on Saturday, the sky was clear for the first time in a week. I had a plan. I needed to see those grant files. But I couldn't just walk into the foundation and ask for them. I needed help. I thought of the name in the outline of my life, the one person I hadn't contacted yet, the journalist. But first, I needed to talk to Dana again. I called her office. It was Saturday. But she picked up. Did you see the email? I asked without preamble. I did, Dana said. Her voice was serious. Stella, this changes things. How? If the foundation was using charitable funds to pay your mother under the guise of guardian relief, that is embezzlement. Dana said, or at least misuse of nonprofit assets. It involves the IRS, the State Attorney General, and potentially federal oversight. So we have her. I said, we have a lead. Dana corrected. An anonymous email is not evidence. We need the files. How do I get them? You don't. Dana said, that is dangerous. You need someone who knows how to look without touching. I looked at the phone. I think I know someone. I said, who? There is a journalist. I said, Kira Mendel. She's been trying to interview me since the party. I think she might be interested in something bigger than a birthday meltdown. Be careful. Stella, Dana warned. Journalists want a story. You want the truth. Those are not always the same thing. I know, I said. But if Marlene built a fortress, I need a siege engine. I hung up. I pulled up the contact information for Kira Mendel. She wrote for the Fairhaven Chronicle, usually covering city hall and zoning disputes. She had messaged me on LinkedIn 2 days ago. Hi, Stella. I heard about the party. I'm not interested in gossip, but I am interested in the foundation. If you ever want to talk off the record, let me know. I typed a reply. Meet me at the coffee press on 4th Street. 10 a.m. Alone. I hit send. I went to my closet and dressed. I chose jeans and a thick sweater. I put my hair in a ponytail. I didn't put on makeup. I didn't need to look pretty. I needed to look credible. I grabbed the binder where I had started organizing everything. The letter, the tax forms, the email printout. I was done being the prop. I was done being the tax write-off. I walked out the door, locking it behind me with a solid, definitive click. The game had changed. It wasn't just about family anymore. It was about the price of a human life in Fairhaven Harbor, and I was about to find out exactly how much Marlene had sold me for. The library computer terminal hummed with a low, headache-inducing whine. I had spent the last 3 hours staring at digitized microfiche and PDF scans of Form 990 filings, the public tax documents that nonprofits are required to file. The Fairhaven Family Promise Foundation, on paper, it was a beacon of civic virtue. Its mission statement was full of words like empowerment, stability, and community resilience. But I was not looking at the mission statement. I was looking at Schedule 1, grants and other assistance to organizations, governments, and individuals in the United States. I scrolled through the filings from the mid-90s, the years of my toddlerhood. There it was. In 1994, the foundation had disbursed a series of grants labeled Guardian Relief Stabilization. The amounts were not enormous. $5,000 here, $7,000 there. But they were frequent. They totaled nearly $40,000 over 2 years. That was a significant amount of money in the 90s, but it was the recipient column that made my breath hitch. The grants were not paid directly to struggling families. They were routed through an entity listed as Carden Blythe Advisory, Trust Account. I knew that name. Carden Blythe was a boutique accounting firm on the corner of Elm and First. They had handled Marlene's personal taxes for 30 years. Mr. Carden sent me a $20 Starbucks gift card every Christmas. I sat back in the hard library chair, the plastic digging into my spine. Marlene had not just adopted me for the tax benefits. She had seemingly paid herself to take me. The foundation, which she helped patronize and fundraise for, had authorized grants to a trust account managed by her own personal accountants. Ostensibly for my care, she had laundered my childhood through a charity. I printed the pages. The printer chugged slowly, spitting out the evidence of my monetization. I went straight to Dana Mercer's office. I did not even call ahead. The receptionist, a young man named Leo, looked up with mild alarm as I burst in. Clutching a folder of warm paper, I need to see her. I said. Dana stepped out of her office, holding a mug of tea. She took one look at my face and opened her door. Come in, Stella. I laid the fresh printouts on her desk, right on top of her neat legal pads. Look at the payee, I said, pointing to the line items. Dana put on her reading glasses. She traced the line with a manicured fingernail. Carden Blythe. She read, Trust Account. That is Marlene's accounting firm. I said, She has been with them since the 80s. Dana frowned, her lawyer brain working through the implications. So, the foundation awards a grant for Guardian Relief, she murmured. The money goes to a third-party trust. The trust likely disperses the funds to the Guardian for living expenses, medical bills, housing costs, Is that legal? I asked. Technically? Maybe, Dana said, though her tone was skeptical, if the grant was legitimate and the expenses were verified. A trust is just a vehicle, but if the guardian was also a major donor or board patron, then it is a conflict of interest. I said, it is self-dealing. Dana corrected. It is using charitable assets for private benefit. She looked up at me, taking off her glasses. Stella, this explains the lie at the party. What do you mean? At the party, Marlene said she adopted you for tax benefits, Dana said. That is a socially acceptable, if tacky, way to joke about the child tax credit or dependency exemptions. It frames her as savvy. But if she admitted the truth, that she never adopted you because keeping you as a ward allowed her to access grant money from a foundation she influenced, that is not a joke. That is fraud. I felt cold. So she lied to cover up something worse. I said, precisely. Dana said, adoption is a legal finality. You become her child. You are her financial responsibility. But a guardianship? A ward placement? That is a state-subsidized role. If she adopted you, the grant money would likely have to stop, because parents are expected to support their own children. By keeping you in a legal gray area, neither fully hers nor fully the state's, she kept the cash flow open. I sank into the chair. She sold me. I whispered. She didn't want a daughter. She wanted a revenue stream. Dana leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. We need to be sure. Stella, this is a strong theory, but we need to see the mechanism of the custody. That is why I went to vital records. I said. I pulled the envelope from my bag. It had arrived that morning, heavy and ominous in my mailbox. I opened it and slid the document across the desk. It was not my original birth certificate. It was a certificate of fact regarding a restricted record. State of North Cascadia, Department of Health. Subject, Stella Hayes. Date of birth, May 12, 1992. Amendment history. Record amended by court order. Petitioner, legal guardian. Date of action, November 10, 1994. Dana studied it. 1994. She said, you were 2 years old. Adoptions usually happen with newborns, or they are processed through foster care agencies. I said, but this says legal guardian. It suggests a handoff. Dana said quietly. A private transfer of custody that was formalized by a court 2 years after you were born. She looked at me. If you were adopted, the petitioner would usually be listed as adoptive parent. The fact that it specifies legal guardian suggests the adoption was never finalized, or the amendment was strictly for a name change or custody assignment. Not parentage. So I am still Liana's daughter. I said, legally, likely, yes, Dana said. Marlene just has a piece of paper that says she gets to make the decisions and collect the checks. I added, the name on the notary stamp I had found in Evelyn's box, Beatrice Knowlton, had been bothering me for days. I found her through a simple White Pages search. There was only one Beatrice Knowlton in the county, residing at the Cedars, an assisted living facility on the north side of town. I went on a Tuesday afternoon. The facility smelled of lavender disinfectant and boiled vegetables. I found Beatrice in the common room, sitting in a wheelchair by a window, watching the rain streak the glass. She was tiny, her skin translucent like onion skin, her white hair wispy and thin. Mrs. Knowlton? I asked softly. She turned her head. Her eyes were milky blue, but they were sharp. I am not buying anything, she said. Her voice was a dry rasp. I am not selling anything. I said, my name is Stella. I wanted to ask you about a document you notarized a long time ago. I pulled out the photocopy of the guardianship paper. I had folded it so only the stamp and the signature date were visible. She squinted at it. 1994. She read, Lord, honey, that was a lifetime ago. I retired in 98. Do you remember this stamp? I asked. Or the woman who asked you to use it? Marlene Hayes? Beatrice's head snapped up. The name triggered something, a reflex of posture. She sat up straighter. Marlene Hayes, she repeated. Big woman? Loud? Always wore those silk scarves? Yes, I said. I remember her. Beatrice said. Hard to forget. She used to come into the office where I worked, the title company. She knew the owner. She acted like she owned the place, too. I pointed to the signature on the document. Liana Hart. Do you remember witnessing this signature? I asked. Beatrice looked at the paper, then out the window. I remember the day, she said slowly. Because it was raining like this, Marlene came in dragging a young woman. The girl looked sick, pale, shaking. Liana? I asked. I did not catch the name. Beatrice said, Marlene was doing all the talking. She was in a rush. Said it was a family emergency. Said they needed to get the paperwork done so she could get the girl some help. Did you read the document? I asked. Beatrice laughed. A dry coughing sound. Read it? Marlene Hayes slapped it on my desk and said, Sign it. B. We are double parked. My boss was standing right there, nodding at me. You did not say no to Marlene in this town, not back then. And the girl? I asked. Did she say anything? Beatrice shook her head. She just cried. She said, quietly, just stood there dripping wet and crying while she signed. She looked at Marlene like she was terrified. I felt a lump in my throat so large I could barely swallow. Thank you. Mrs. Knowlton, I whispered. Beatrice looked at me. She reached out a bony hand and touched my wrist. You have her eyes, she said. The crying girl. You have her eyes. I drove home in a daze. The image of the crying girl. My mother. Liana, standing in a title company office while Marlene bulldozed her into signing me away, played on a loop in my mind. When I got to my apartment, I went straight to the kitchen. I did not turn on the lights. I sat on the cold tile floor and pulled Evelyn's box toward me. I had gone through the papers, but I hadn't looked closely at the loose photographs at the bottom. I sifted through them. Marlene and Evelyn at a picnic, a landscape of the lighthouse, and then a small, square Polaroid. It was slightly overexposed. It showed a woman sitting on a porch swing. She had wild, dark hair and a face that was strikingly similar to mine, but sharper, more fragile. She was holding a toddler in her lap. The toddler was me. I recognized the stuffed bear I was clutching. I flipped the photo over. In Evelyn's handwriting, Liana, 1994. I stared at the face of the woman who had birthed me. She didn't look crazy. She didn't look like a drug addict or a criminal, which were the vague implications Marlene had always floated about her troubled sister. She looked young. She looked tired. She looked like she was holding on to me for dear life. I put the photo down on the tile. I pulled my knees to my chest. I didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. Instead, I just breathed, in and out. The air felt thin. I had been loved. That was the realization that broke me. Marlene's narrative was that she had saved me from a wreck, but the photo told a different story. The way Liana's hand cupped the back of my head, that was instinct. That was possession. She hadn't given me up. She had been erased. The doorbell rang. I wiped my face, though it was dry, and stood up. My legs were stiff. It was Jonah. He had a small box in his hand. I remembered. He said, stepping inside, I did that genealogy thing a few years ago. Ancestry Web. I still have the login, and I bought a kit for you. He held it out, a plastic tube in a cardboard box. I stared at it. If you do this, Jonah said, his voice gentle, there is no going back. If Liana is out there, or any of her relatives, this might find them. I took the box. I feel like I'm betraying someone. I said, I feel like I am doing something illicit. You are not. Jonah said, you are just asking a question. I went into the bathroom. I spat into the tube. I sealed it. The chemical preservative turned the liquid blue. I put it in the return envelope. I am advocating for myself. I told my reflection in the mirror, I am not a tax write-off. I am a person. 2 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. Usually, I ignored them. But I was expecting a call from Dana. Hello? Stella Hayes? Yes, this is Kira Mendel. I am a reporter with the Fairhaven Chronicle. I froze. I do not have any comment. I said automatically. Please, just listen, Kira said. Her voice was fast, low. I am not calling about the birthday party. I know what happened. But that is not my beat. I cover municipal corruption and nonprofit oversight. I gripped the phone tighter. Go on. I said, I have been looking into the Fairhaven Family Promise Foundation for 6 months. Kira said, there are irregularities in their grant disbursement patterns. I heard a rumor that you might have some personal insight into their guardian relief programs from the 90s. Who told you that? I asked. I cannot reveal my sources. Kira said, but I think we are looking for the same thing. I hesitated. Dana had warned me. Journalists want a story, but I needed the files, and Kira might know how to get them. Off the record. I said. Completely off the record. Kira agreed. Meet me at the coffee press on 4th Street. 10 minutes. I met her. She was younger than I expected, with messy curly hair and intense glasses. She had a laptop open and a coffee that looked like it had gone cold an hour ago. You are Stella, she said. I sat down. You said you are investigating the foundation. I said. Kira turned her laptop screen toward me. It showed a spreadsheet of numbers. The foundation has a board member named Elias Vane. She said, he is a real estate developer. Every time he has a project stall, the foundation issues a community development grant to a shell company he controls. What does that have to do with me? I asked. Because in the 90s, Kira said, scrolling up, the pattern started with your mother. Marlene Hayes was the test case. She figured out how to use the grant system to subsidize personal expenses. She paved the way for the others. I looked at the spreadsheet. It was a map of corruption. If you help me prove the pattern, Kira said, looking me in the eye, I can help you find out exactly where the money for your guardianship came from. And more importantly, what conditions were attached to it. Conditions? Grants like these usually come with strings, Kira said. Non-disclosure agreements, custody stipulations. If Marlene took that money, she signed something promising to deliver certain results, like keeping Liana quiet? I asked. Kira nodded. Exactly. When I got home, there was a package on my doorstep. It was wrapped in heavy, expensive silver paper with a satin ribbon. Marlene's signature wrapping. I carried it inside like it was a live grenade. I placed it on the kitchen table and cut the ribbon with scissors. Inside was a wooden box. I opened it. It was filled with photo albums, but not just any albums. These were the ones Marlene kept on the high shelf in the library. The ones I was never allowed to touch. On top was a card. Stella, I know you are confused and hurting right now. I know you think you found some great secret, but remember who held you when you had a fever. Remember who paid for the orthodontist. Remember who gave you your life. These are for you, so you do not forget the truth. Love. Mom. I opened the top album. It was curated propaganda. Every photo showed Marlene smiling, holding me, dressing me, feeding me. There were no photos of anyone else. It was a shrine to her own motherhood. I felt a wave of revulsion. Remember who gave you your life. It was a threat. It was a reminder of debt. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe. Hey, are you okay? Marlene called my mom. She said you are having a breakdown. She asked if we should stage an intervention. I stared at the screen. She was not just gaslighting me. She was salting the earth. I went to work the next day. I walked into the open plan office of the architecture firm. Usually, there was a morning buzz, people saying hello, grabbing coffee. Today, it was quiet. As I walked to my desk, heads turned and then quickly looked away. My manager, David, called me into his office at 10 o'clock. Stella, he said, closing the door. He looked uncomfortable. Is everything okay with the Riverside project? I asked. The project is fine, he said. Look, I had a call yesterday. From your mother. My stomach dropped. David, I began. She sounded very concerned. David said, holding up a hand. She mentioned you have been under a lot of stress, that you might be unstable right now. I stood up. My mother is a manipulator. David, I am fine. I am doing my job. I know, David said, and you are a great project manager. But She mentioned some medical history, some concerns about erratic behavior. He looked at me with pity. Maybe you should take some time off. Stella, a week or two, just to get your head straight. We can cover your workload. I realized then what was happening. Marlene was not just embarrassed, she was terrified, and she was using her most powerful weapon, her reputation. She was painting me as the crazy daughter, the ungrateful, unstable girl who was making up stories. If I spoke out now, no one would believe me. They would just see the breakdown Marlene had predicted. I looked at David. I do not need time off, I said, my voice steady, though my hands were shaking behind my back. I will be at my desk. I walked out of his office. Everyone was looking. I could feel their eyes. I sat down at my computer. I opened my email. I had a message from Kira Mendel. I found the grant agreement from 1994. You need to see this. I looked around the office, the sympathetic, judgmental faces of my coworkers, the heavy silence. Marlene had declared war. She thought she could crush me with social pressure. She thought she could shame me into silence. She was wrong. I wasn't going to break. I was going to leak. I typed a reply to Kira. I am ready. Send it. I looked at the gift box of photos on my desk, which I had brought in to remind myself of her tactics. Remember who gave you your life. I picked up a pen and wrote on a sticky note, I remember, and I stuck it to the monitor. The war was on, and unlike Marlene, I didn't care about the tax benefits. I cared about the receipts. The notification arrived on a Tuesday morning, buzzing against the granite countertop of my kitchen island while I was making coffee. It was a generic alert from Ancestry Web, the kind that usually meant a fourth cousin had uploaded a new photo of a shared great aunt. You have a new DNA match. I wiped my wet hands on a dish towel and unlocked the phone. The screen was bright, the interface cheerful with its primary colors and leaf icons. I clicked through to the results page. The pie chart of my ethnicity had not changed much, mostly British Isles and Western European, but the list of matches had updated. At the very top, labeled Close Family, was a name I did not recognize. Marcus Hale. Relationship, first to second cousin. Shared DNA. 612 centimorgans. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew the name Hale. It was a branch of the Hart family tree, distant cousins of my grandmother Evelyn. But a match this high meant we shared a set of grandparents. There was a message icon next to his name. A red dot. I opened it. Stella. I saw your name pop up this morning. I am Marcus. My mother was cousins with Liana Hart. I am not sure what you know, or what Marlene has told you, but my Aunt Liana never forgot you. She talked about you every time she was lucid enough to call us. She disappeared from the family radar about 15 years ago after a crisis. But if you are looking for answers, I might have some pieces of the puzzle. I live in Fairhaven, over in the West District. I would be happy to buy you a coffee. Cautiously, Marcus. I read the message 3 times. She talked about you. For 33 years, I had been told I was a blank slate, a child with no history until Marlene wrote her name on me. Now, a stranger was telling me I had been a topic of conversation. I had been missed. I typed back immediately, my fingers stiff. I want to meet. Today, 11 o'clock, the roasting plant on Dockside. It was a public place, busy and loud, neutral ground. See you there, he replied. Marcus Hale was a man in his early 40s with kind eyes and the sort of weathering that comes from working outdoors. He was wearing a flannel shirt and looked nothing like the polished, sharp-edged people Marlene associated with. He was sitting at a corner table, nursing a black coffee. When I approached, he stood up. He didn't hug me. He extended a hand. Stella, he said, you look like her, around the eyes. I took his hand. His grip was firm, dry, and surprisingly grounding. Thank you for meeting me, I said, sitting down. I felt like I was vibrating. A tuning fork struck against a hard surface. Marcus sat back, looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and sadness. I did not know if you would ever show up on the site, he said. My side of the family, we were told to stay away. Marlene made it very clear that any contact would be considered harassment. Harassment? I asked. Interfering with a stable home environment, Marcus clarified. That was the phrase the lawyers used. I took a breath. Tell me about Liana. I said, please. Marlene says she was unstable, that she abandoned me. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Liana was not unstable, he said. At least, not at first. She was young. She was 19 when she had you. She was brilliant, actually, artistic, but she got involved with the wrong crowd. And by wrong crowd, I do not mean drug dealers. I mean the people who run this town. He lowered his voice, leaning in over the table. There was a scandal. Stella. A prominent donor, I will not say the name yet because I do not want to get sued, but he was big in the maritime industry, got involved with Liana. When she got pregnant, it was a problem. He was married. He was on the board of everything, the foundation. I whispered. Marcus nodded. Exactly. The foundation. Marlene stepped in to fix it. She has always been the fixer. She told everyone Liana was overwhelmed, that she couldn't handle motherhood. She moved Liana into a guest house and took you, but the adoption... I said, Marlene said she adopted me. Marcus shook his head slowly. There was no adoption. Stella. Not a real one. Liana never signed the relinquishment papers. She refused. She wanted you back once she got on her feet. So what happened? She had a breakdown, Marcus said bluntly. About 2 years in, they kept moving the goalposts, Marlene would say. Get a job and you can have her. Liana got a job. Then Marlene said, get a bigger apartment. Liana got an apartment. Then Marlene said, you seem stressed. Maybe you need a break. He paused, his jaw tightening. They gaslighted her until she snapped. Marcus said, and when she finally lost her temper in public, screaming at Marlene in a grocery store, Marlene used it. She had Liana committed, involuntary hold. My stomach turned over. Where? I asked. A private facility. Marcus said, out of state, paid for by a trust. The trust managed by Carden Blythe? I asked. Marcus looked surprised. You know about them? I found the tax forms. I said, then you know. He said, Liana didn't vanish. Stella, she was processed. She was managed like a liability. For years. Her contact with the family was filtered through that accounting firm. If she wanted to write a letter, it had to be reviewed. If she wanted to make a phone call, it had to be monitored. I felt a surge of rage so pure it felt like heat radiating from my skin. It wasn't the hot, messy anger of a family fight. It was the cold, industrial rage of realizing my mother had been treated like an unruly employee who needed to be silenced. She was a prisoner. I said, she was a line item, Marcus corrected, and you were the asset they were fighting over. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. I have some things here, he said. Scans of letters she wrote that were never mailed. My mom kept them. Liana sent them to us through a nurse who felt sorry for her. He slid the drive across the table. She loved you. Stella. She never stopped fighting. She just ran out of money and sanity before she could win. I took the drive. It felt heavy, despite its size. Is she still alive? I asked. The question hung in the air, fragile as glass. Marcus hesitated. I think so, he said. But she is off the grid. The payments stopped about 5 years ago. We think she was released. Or she ran. We haven't been able to find her. Marlene might know, but she would never tell. I closed my hand around the drive. She will. I said, she will tell me everything. I went from the cafe to Kira Mendel's office at the Chronicle. It was a cluttered cubicle in a building that smelled of ink and deadline stress. Kira was typing furiously when I arrived. She spun her chair around. You look like you have seen a ghost, she said. I saw a ghost's nephew. I said, I sat down on a stack of newspapers. I know about the donor. I know about the breakdown. Kira nodded, not surprised. It tracks, she said. I have been cross-referencing the grant data you sent me with the Foundation's board minutes from the 90s. She turned her screen toward me. Look at this. She said, it was a visualization of the data. Lines connecting names and dates. Here is the Guardian Relief Grant that went to Carden Blythe in 1994. Kira said, pointing to a thick red line, and here, 3 months later, is a massive donation to the foundation from the Greystone Maritime Trust. Greystone, I said, that is the big shipping conglomerate. And guess who was the CEO of Greystone in 1994? Kira asked. I shook my head. Arthur Greystone. She said, he died 10 years ago, but back then, he was the king of Fairhaven, and he was Marlene's biggest social sponsor, the donor. I realized, the man Marcus wouldn't name, so Marlene covers up his affair with her sister, takes the baby, and suddenly the foundation gets a massive injection of cash, and Marlene gets a grant to cover the costs of the kid. Kira summarized, it is a perfect circle of silence. And the identifiers? I asked. The inconsistent names on my tax forms? Kira clicked another tab. I found 3 other families who received similar grants. She said, in 2 cases, the children's social security numbers were transposed or altered in the internal records. It looks like a way to prevent the state auditors from linking the charitable aid to specific, traceable dependents. If they audit Stella Hayes, they find nothing. If they audit Stella Hart, they find a dependent of a ward. It is designed to be confusing. It is designed to be untraceable. I said, it is money laundering. Stella, Kira said quietly. They were washing hush money through a charity and calling it humanitarian aid. I stared at the screen. My life was a spreadsheet error. My childhood was a line item in a money laundering scheme. I need the original agreement. I said, I need the paper where Marlene agreed to take the money in exchange for silence. That is the smoking gun, Kira said. But it won't be in the public filings. It will be in the private legal archives of the foundation, or in Marlene's safe. I have a key to a safe deposit box. I said, but that was Evelyn's. Marlene's files are in her house. Kira looked at me. Do not break in. Stella, seriously, if you get caught, you lose all credibility. You become the unstable daughter they are painting you to be. I won't break in. I said, I will wait for her to invite me. I did not have to wait long. 2 days later, Marlene called. Her voice was different, softer, weary, stripped of the manic cheerfulness she usually projected. Stella, she said, please, we need to talk. Not at a party, not with lawyers, just us. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, looking at it with suspicion. What do you want, Marlene? I asked. I want to explain. She said, I want to buy you dinner, the solarium at the yacht club. It is private. Just come. Please. I agreed. I called Dana immediately. Do not sign anything. Dana warned, do not agree to anything, and record it if you can. Though in this state, you need 2-party consent. So it won't be admissible in court, but it will be useful for us to know her position. I am not going to record her. I said, I want to look her in the eye. The yacht club was exactly the kind of place Marlene felt safe. High ceilings, waiters in white jackets, the smell of old money and lemon polish. The solarium was a glass-walled room overlooking the marina. It was empty except for our table. Marlene was already there. She was wearing a cream-colored suit, impeccable as always, but she looked older. The lines around her mouth were deeper. She had a glass of Chardonnay in front of her, half empty. Stella, she said, standing up to kiss my cheek. I turned my head so her lips hit the air. She flinched, but recovered quickly. We sat down. I ordered an iced tea. I wanted a drink, but I needed to be sharp. I hate that we are fighting. Marlene began, clasping her hands on the table. It breaks my heart. You know you are everything to me. Stop, I said. Just stop with the Hallmark cards. You told people I was a tax write-off. You lied about my birth. You lied about Liana. Marlene sighed, a long, tragic exhalation. Liana, she said, shaking her head. I was wondering when you would find that name. You erased her. I said, I protected you from her. Marlene snapped, her voice rising before she checked herself. She leaned in, her eyes intense. You have no idea what it was like. Stella. She was sick. She was dangerous. She would have dragged you into a life of squalor and chaos. I saved you. You had her committed. I said, Marcus told me, you put her away and you paid for it with money from the foundation. Marlene went still. The glass of wine froze halfway to her mouth. Marcus Hale is a failed contractor who has always been jealous of our success, she said coldly. Is he lying about the money? I asked. Is he lying about Carden Blythe? Marlene set the glass down. It made a sharp click on the glass table. You do not understand the complexities of the situation. She said, yes, there was a trust. Yes, there was support. Liana needed care that was incredibly expensive. I arranged for it. I made sure she was safe. And I made sure you were safe. By lying to me? By giving you a clean slate? Marlene insisted. Do you think you would have been happier knowing your mother was in a mental institution? Do you think you would have thrived knowing your father was... She stopped. My father was who? I asked. Arthur Greystone? Marlene's face went white. Truly, shockingly white. She looked around the empty room. Terrified. Do not say that name, she hissed. Why? I asked. Because it proves you were paid off? Because it proves the grant money was hush money? Marlene reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her nails dug into my skin. I did what I had to do. Stella, I made a choice. I could have let the scandal destroy us all. I could have let Liana ruin her life and yours. Instead, I built a wall around us. I built a life for you where you never had to worry about where the next meal was coming from. She squeezed my hand harder. That is the price of protection, she said. Sometimes you have to edit the truth to keep the people you love safe. I am not sorry for giving you a beautiful life. She wasn't sorry. She sat there, dripping in diamonds paid for by the silence of my biological mother, and she felt virtuous. Evelyn knew, didn't she? I asked. Marlene's eyes shifted. She looked down at the tablecloth. Evelyn was conflicted. Marlene said, she left me a letter. I lied. I wanted to see her reaction. Marlene looked up, panic flaring in her eyes. She wouldn't. She whispered, she promised. Promised who? I asked. You? She made me promise to keep it a secret, Marlene said, her voice cracking. She said, Marlene, if you take this girl, you take the burden. You never let her know she was a mistake. I pulled my hand away. I was not a mistake. I said, I was a liability. There is a difference. Marlene stared at me, her chest heaving. You are being cruel, she said. You are sounding just like her, just like Liana when she was off her meds. I stood up. I felt a calm detachment. I am not Liana. I said, I am the person who knows where the money came from. I threw a $20 bill on the table for my tea. And Marlene? I said, the tax benefits joke? It wasn't funny. It was a confession. I walked out. I didn't look back. I heard her calling my name, but it sounded small in the cavernous room. I walked to the parking lot, my heels clicking on the asphalt. The cool night air felt good on my flushed face. I reached for my keys. My car was gone. I stopped, looking at the empty space where I had parked. I was in spot B4. I had checked the sign. Guest parking. I looked around. There was a new sign zip-tied to the lamppost directly in front of the spot. Reserved for Commodore members only. Violators towed. I knew that sign hadn't been there an hour ago. I was observant. I was an architect. I noticed signage. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Parking rules are strictly enforced. Just like family rules. I stared at the screen. It was petty. It was childish. And it was terrifying. It meant she was watching. It meant she had someone in the parking lot, waiting for me to leave, ready to inconvenience me, to unsettle me. I called Jonah. Come pick me up. I said, my voice was steady, but my knees were shaking. Marlene towed my car. Dana Mercer was not amused when I told her the next morning. This is escalation, she said. It is harassment. Can we file a restraining order? I asked. On what grounds? Dana asked. That she towed your car from a private lot? That she took you to dinner? Stella. She is careful. She is pushing buttons that don't leave bruises. So what do? You document. Dana said, you assume everything you do is being watched. You assume your emails are being read. Change your passwords, by the way, and you build your case. So I went home, and I started building. I went to the office supply store and bought a 3-ring binder, a red one. I cleared off the dining room table. I started a timeline. 1992. Stella born. Father allegedly Arthur Greystone. 1994. Guardianship granted to Marlene. Liana. Disappears. 1994. Grant money flows from Foundation to Carden Blythe. 1995. Tax returns show inconsistent dependents. 2000. Liana committed to out-of-state facility, per Marcus. 2024. The birthday party. I punched holes in the photocopies. I slid the tax returns into plastic sleeves. I printed out the emails from Marcus and Kira. I was turning my trauma into data. Jonah came home and found me surrounded by paper. He looked at the wall, where I had taped up the spreadsheet Kira had given me. This looks like a conspiracy theorist's basement, he said gently. It is a conspiracy. I said, it is a conspiracy of two. Marlene and the accountant. He sat down next to me. He put his hand on my back. I am scared. Stella, he said. Me too. I said, no. I am scared of what this does to you. He said, you are not sleeping. You are checking your mirrors when you drive. You are fighting a billionaire on her own turf. I put down the hole punch. I have to. Jonah, why? He asked. We could just leave. We could move to Oregon. We could never speak to her again. I looked at the binder. I looked at the photo of Liana, because she bought me. I said, she bought me with stolen money and she used me to polish her reputation. If I walk away, she keeps the reputation. She keeps the lie. I looked at Jonah, and because somewhere, Liana might still be waiting for someone to answer her letters. Jonah nodded. He understood. He didn't like it, but he understood. He kissed my forehead. Then let's finish the binder, he said. The next few days were a war of attrition. My car was returned, but the tires were slashed the next morning. I received a bouquet of dead roses at my office with a card that said, sympathies. I got a call from my credit card company saying there was suspicious activity on my account. Someone had tried to charge $5,000 at a luxury spa in Switzerland. Marlene was throwing sand in the gears of my life. She wanted me overwhelmed. She wanted me to snap so she could point and say, see? She is unstable. I didn't snap. I changed my bank accounts. I installed a security camera at my apartment door. I took Ubers to work. And I kept digging. I met Marcus again. He gave me the address of the facility where Liana had been sent. Serenity Hills in Nevada. I called them. They confirmed Liana Hart had been a patient from 2000 to 2010. Discharged to whose care? I asked the records administrator. I cannot release that information without a subpoena, she said. But you have the record? I have the record. It was another brick in the wall. I was ready. I had the timeline. I had the grant patterns. I had the witness in Marcus. But I needed one more thing. I needed to know where the money stopped. If the payments for Liana stopped 5 years ago, where did she go? And why did they stop? Did she die? Or did she escape? I sat in my living room, the red binder open in front of me. The city of Fairhaven twinkled outside, oblivious to the rot at its center. I am coming for you. Mom, I thought, and I am not bringing a birthday cake. I am bringing an audit. The document Dana Mercer slid across her mahogany desk was not the smoking gun I had hoped for, but it was the map that showed where the gun was buried. It was a single sheet of paper, a limited release from the court archives regarding the amendment of my birth certificate. Dana tapped the paper with the end of her pen. Look at the petitioner, she said. I leaned in. I had expected to see Marlene Hayes or perhaps Carden Blythe Advisory. Instead, the line for the petitioner, the person who had legally requested that my birth record be sealed and altered, listed a name I did not know. Judge H. T. Sterling, acting as court-appointed intermediary. I looked up at Dana. Who is Judge Sterling? I asked. He was a family court judge in the 90s. Dana said, "He retired 10 years ago and moved to Florida. But that is not the point. The point is that this was not a standard adoption petition. In a standard adoption, the adoptive parents file the petition. Here, the court itself initiated the seal." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means this was a guardianship maneuver," Dana said, her voice dropping to that low, serious register she used when she was thinking 3 moves ahead. "It suggests that the state, or someone with enough power to move the state, wanted your identity scrubbed before Marlene ever signed a tax return." She sat back, taking off her reading glasses. "Stella," she said, "this confirms that you were not adopted in the traditional sense. You were transferred. It was a private placement, likely orchestrated to bypass the usual vetting of social services. Marlene didn't go through an agency, she went through a judge, and the judge made sure Liana's name was removed. The judge made sure the file was sealed tight." Dana corrected, and then Marlene stepped in as the guardian of record. "It is a legal sleight of hand." I felt a cold knot in my stomach. "So it wasn't just Marlene." I said, "It was the system. It was a favor." Dana said, "A very high-level favor." I left Dana's office and went straight to meet Kira Mendel. She was waiting for me in the back corner of a dusty bookstore that smelled of vanilla and old glue. She had her laptop open and a stack of photocopies that looked suspiciously like the Foundation's annual reports. "You were right about the timing," Kira said as soon as I sat down. She turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a digitized newspaper clipping from the Fairhaven Chronicle, dated November 1994. The headline read, "Gala of the Season. Foundation raises record funds for families." The photo showed a ballroom filled with people in tuxedos and sequins. In the center, radiant and laughing, was Marlene. She was wearing a black velvet dress I remembered seeing in the back of her closet. She looked triumphant. Standing next to her, holding a giant ceremonial check, was a man with silver hair and a heavy, bulldog face. "That is Arthur Greystone," Kira said, pointing to the man, CEO of Greystone Maritime Trust. I stared at the man who might be my father. He didn't look like me. He looked like money. He looked like the kind of man who could make problems disappear with a phone call to a judge. "Look at the date," Kira said, "November 10th, 1994. I froze. "That is the date on my amended birth record." I said, "Exactly," Kira said. "The same week the court sealed your file and handed you to Marlene. Greystone Maritime Trust made a donation of $250,000 to the Fairhaven Family Promise Foundation. $250,000. I repeated, in 1994. That is over $500,000 in today's money." Kira finished. "And immediately after that donation landed, the foundation created the Guardian Relief Program, and the first recipient? Marlene Hayes." I whispered. Kira nodded. "She didn't just get paid. Stella, she got launched. Before this gala, Marlene was just a regular social climber. After this, she was the face of charity. She used the Greystone donation to fund the programs that made her famous. She built her entire reputation as a philanthropist, using the hush money they paid her to hide you." I felt sick. I actually felt the physical sensation of nausea rising in my throat. "All those years," I said, my voice shaking. "All those years she talked about how hard she worked, about how she sacrificed to send me to private school, about how she paid for my braces and my violin lessons." Kira looked at me with sympathy. "I dug into the foundation's ledger for those years," she said softly. "I found line items for educational support, Ward H. I found orthodontic assistance, Ward H. I closed my eyes. She didn't pay for any of it. I said, the foundation paid for it. She used the grant money to raise me. And then she took the credit for being a saint. She monetized the secret." Kira said. "She turned a cover-up into a career." I looked at the photo of Marlene again. She looked so happy, so proud. "She stole my mother." I said, "She stole my identity. And then she charged the bill to a charity." I stood up. The bookstore felt too small. The air felt too thick. "I need to see the letters." I said, I drove to Marcus Hale's house. He lived in a small bungalow on the west side of town, the part of Fairhaven where the view was of the rail yard, not the ocean. He invited me in without a word. The house was modest, clean, and filled with the smell of sawdust. I asked him for the copies. He went to a desk in the corner and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He handed it to me. I didn't read them there. I couldn't. I drove home. Jonah was at work. The apartment was silent. I sat on the floor of my living room, the same way I had sat when I found the key. I opened the envelope. There were dozens of them. Some were written on lined notebook paper, some on the backs of flyers, some on official-looking stationery from Serenity Hills Treatment Center. I picked up the first one, dated 1996. My sweet Stella, today is your 4th birthday. I hope you got the bear I sent to Marlene. I asked her to tell you it was from your Auntie Liana, but I don't know if she will. I imagine you are getting so big. Do you like to draw? I used to draw all the time. I drew a picture of a bird for you today. The nurses let me keep the crayons. I love you more than the moon. Liana. I picked up another. 1999. Stella. I heard you started 2nd grade. Marlene mentioned in a legal update that you are reading above your grade level. I am so proud. I am working hard to get better. The doctors say if I follow the rules, I might get a supervised visit next year. I'm following every rule. I make my bed. I take the pills. I just want to see your face. Love, Mom, and another, 2003. Dear Stella, they returned my last 3 letters. Return to sender. Marlene says it is confusing for you to hear from me. She says you are happy and stable, and I am disrupting that. I don't want to disrupt you. I just want you to know I didn't leave. I was taken. There is a difference. Please remember that. I am still fighting. There were no rants. There were no incoherent scribbles. There was just a steady, quiet drumbeat of love. She asked about my teeth. She asked if I liked the ocean. She told me she was learning to knit. I read until the sun went down and the room turned gray. I sat there in the dark. The papers spread around me like fallen leaves. I didn't sob. I didn't scream. I just let the tears fall, hot and silent, tracking down my cheeks and dripping onto my shirt. She had been there, the whole time. She had been writing into the void, begging to be a mother, while Marlene intercepted her words and filed them away in a box somewhere, or burned them. Marlene had told me Liana was crazy, but these letters weren't crazy. They were desperate. They were the letters of a woman who was being erased and was trying to leave a mark on the world. Any mark, to prove she existed. I gathered the letters up. I pressed them to my chest. I heard you. Mom, I whispered to the empty room. I hear you now. The next morning, I put on my best suit. It was a navy blue power suit I usually saved for client presentations. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. I applied my makeup with the precision of war paint. I drove to the headquarters of the Fairhaven Family Promise Foundation. It was a gleaming glass building near the waterfront. Marlene's name was on a plaque in the lobby. Benefactor Circle. I told the receptionist I had an appointment with Elise Rowan, the executive director. I didn't have an appointment, but I had the kind of confidence that made people assume I did. Elise Rowan came out 5 minutes later. She was a woman in her 40s, polished, efficient, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ms. Hayes, she said, what a surprise. Marlene didn't mention you were stopping by. This isn't about Marlene. I said, it is about the audit. Elise's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Come into my office, she said. Her office was all glass and white leather. It looked like the bridge of a spaceship. We sat down. I know about the Guardian Relief grants. I said, I laid a copy of the 1994 tax filing on her desk. I know about Carden Blythe. I know about the Greystone donation. Elise didn't look at the paper. She looked at me. Her expression shifted from welcoming to calculating. That was a long time ago. Stella, she said, before my time. But the liability is current. I said, fraud doesn't have a statute of limitations when it involves charitable trust violations. Elise sighed. She opened a drawer and pulled out a file. We are aware that there were Procedural irregularities in the past, she said smoothly. The foundation has grown since then. We have new compliance standards. She slid a folder across the desk. We value your family's contribution to this organization. Elise said, Marlene has been a pillar of this community. We would hate to see her legacy tarnished by a misunderstanding of historical bookkeeping. I opened the folder. Inside was a check. It was made out to Stella Hayes. The amount was $50,000. And underneath the check was a document. Confidentiality and non-disclosure agreement. What is this? I asked. We call it a legacy grant. Elise said, It is to help you with your transition. We heard you were having some personal struggles. We want to support you, just like we supported you when you were a child. I looked at the check. It was a lot of money. It was enough to pay off my student loans. It was enough to move to Oregon and start over. They were trying to buy me, again, 30 years ago. They bought my mother's silence. Now, they were buying mine. I looked at Elise. You think I'm looking for a payout? I asked. I think you are a pragmatic woman, Elise said. I think you understand that dragging this into the public eye helps no one. It destroys your mother. It damages the foundation. It hurts the families we serve today. She leaned forward. Take the grant. Stella, sign the paper. Go live your life. Let the past stay in the past. I closed the folder. I slid it back across the desk. I am not a charity case. Elise, I said, and I am not for sale. Elise's face hardened. You are making a mistake, she said. You are taking on people with resources you cannot imagine. I stood up. I have resources too. I said, I have the truth, and unlike you, I don't have to pay anyone to believe it. I walked out. My heart was pounding. But my head was clear. They were scared. They were offering $50,000 because they knew the damage was worth millions. Marlene did not wait long to retaliate. That evening, I was sitting on the couch with Jonah, eating takeout, when my phone started blowing up. Have you seen Facebook? Chloe texted. OMG Stella. What is she doing? Priya messaged. I opened the app. There, on Marlene's public profile, which had 5,000 followers, was a photo of me. It was a photo from when I was a teenager, looking moody and gothic. The caption read, My heart is heavy today. As a mother, you do everything you can to protect your children, even from themselves. My beautiful daughter Stella is going through a profound crisis of identity right now. It is heartbreaking to watch someone you love struggle with mental health and delusions. Please, friends, keep her in your prayers. And please respect our privacy as we try to get her the help she needs. Motherhood. Mental health awareness, pray for Stella. It had 300 likes in an hour. The comments were pouring in. So sorry to hear this. Marlene, you are such a saint for standing by her. Mental illness is so hard on the family. Stay strong. She had weaponized empathy. She had framed my discovery of the truth as a psychotic break. She had inoculated the community against anything I might say. If I spoke out now, I was just the crazy daughter fulfilling her mother's prayer request. Jonah read the post over my shoulder. That is evil, he said. That is actually evil. It is brilliant, I said, feeling a cold numbness. She is controlling the narrative, but she wasn't done. A notification popped up. An event invite. Community support night at the Hayes residence. Join us for an evening of support for the foundation and a special prayer circle for families in crisis. She was hosting a fundraiser. In her house, tomorrow night, she was going to perform her martyrdom in real time, with wine and cheese. I threw my phone onto the cushion. She wins. I said, she always wins. She has the audience. No, Jonah said. She has the stage. That is different. The next morning, the squeeze tightened. I walked into work and my keycard didn't work. The red light blinked at me. The security guard, a man I had known for 5 years, wouldn't meet my eyes. Mr. Davison wants to see you, he said. He buzzed me in. David was not in his office. He was in the conference room with the HR director. Stella, the HR director said. She was holding a folder. Due to a corporate restructuring of the project management division, your position is being eliminated. Effective immediately. I stared at them. Restructuring? I said, we just signed 3 new contracts. We are understaffed. It is a strategic pivot, David said, looking at the table. We are offering you 2 weeks of severance. I laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. Does this strategic pivot have anything to do with Greystone Maritime? I asked, because I know they are one of our biggest clients. David went pale. This is strictly a business decision, the HR director said sharply. I took the severance packet. I know what this is. I said, tell Marlene she didn't need to get me fired. I was planning to quit anyway. I packed my box. I walked out. I sat in my car in the parking garage. I was unemployed. My reputation was being shredded online. My mother was hosting a prayer circle for my insanity. Jonah called me. I heard. He said, David called me. He felt guilty. I am fine, I said. Stella, let's go. Jonah said, seriously, let's pack the car tonight. We can be in Oregon by tomorrow. We don't need this. We don't need to win. We just need to survive. I looked at the severance packet on the passenger seat. If we run, she writes the end of the story. I said, she tells everyone I had a breakdown and disappeared. She wins. Does it matter? Jonah asked. It matters to Liana, I said. I hung up. I drove to Dana's office. Dana and Kira were already there. They had the whiteboard covered in notes. She fired me, I said, dropping the box of my desk belongings on the floor. Or rather, she had her friends pull the strings. Dana nodded grimly. We expected that. She said, it is the pressure campaign. She wants you to feel like you have nothing left to lose so you will take the settlement. Or she wants to break me so I actually do go crazy. I said, are you ready to pull the trigger? Kira asked. What is the trigger? I asked. We file a formal complaint with the State Charity Oversight Bureau. Dana said, we attach the tax forms, the grant history, and the affidavit from Beatrice Knowlton. And simultaneously, Kira publishes the article. The article, Kira said, will detail the pattern of self-dealing at the foundation. It will name Marlene. It will name Greystone. It will expose the grant system. I looked at the whiteboard. One condition. I said, what? Kira asked. You redact the names of the other families. I said, the other people who got grants. The other kids whose parents were paid off. Why? Kira asked. That proves the pattern. Because they are innocent. I said, they didn't ask to be part of a money laundering scheme. I am not going to ruin their lives just to get back at my mother. I am not her. Kira looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. We redact the victims. We leave Marlene exposed. When do we launch? I asked. Tomorrow morning, Dana said. We file at 9 a.m. The article goes live at 9:05. I took a deep breath. Do it, I said. That night, the rain returned to Fairhaven Harbor. It beat against the windows of our apartment. A rhythmic drumming that usually helped me sleep. Tonight, it felt like a countdown. Jonah was asleep in the bedroom. I was sitting in the kitchen, staring at the red binder. Tomorrow, it would all be over. The secret would be out. Marlene would be destroyed, or she would destroy me. There was no middle ground anymore. My phone lay on the table. It was midnight. The screen lit up. Unknown number. I stared at it. It wasn't Marlene. Marlene's number was blocked. I picked it up. Hello? There was silence on the other end. Static. The sound of someone breathing. Hello? I said again. Then, a voice. It was raspy, broken, like a voice that hadn't been used in a long time, but it was familiar. It sounded like the voice in my own head. Stella, the woman whispered. Who is this? I asked, my hand gripping the edge of the table. It's me, the voice said. It's Mom. My heart stopped. Liana? I breathed. Don't do it, she whispered. The voice was terrified. Please, they will hurt you. The line clicked. Dead air. I sat there. The phone pressed to my ear, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. She was alive. She knew what I was doing. And she was terrified. Hope and dread colliding. I looked at the rain streaking the window. I wasn't just fighting for a memory anymore. I was fighting for a living, breathing woman who was still afraid of the dark. I put the phone down. I am not stopping. I whispered to the rain, I am coming to get you. The number was a ghost, a prepaid burner phone with no billing address. But Marcus Hale knew people who knew people. By 3 o'clock in the morning, while the rain lashed against the windows of my apartment, he had a location. The phone had pinged a tower in Pine Ridge Junction, a dusty, forgotten town 3 hours inland, nestled in the rain shadow of the mountains. It was not a place people went to be found. It was a place people went to disappear. I did not sleep. I packed a bag, threw the red binder into the back seat of my car, which I had retrieved from the impound lot at exorbitant cost, and waited for the sun to rise. Jonah wanted to come, but I told him no. This was a conversation that could not have an audience. I drove east, away from the gray, churning ocean that defined Fairhaven Harbor, into the brown, scrubby hills of the interior. The air grew drier, the houses smaller, the fences more aggressive. Pine Ridge Junction was a grid of cracked asphalt and faded siding. I found the address Marcus had given me. It was a small, manufactured home at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by chain-link fencing. There was a garden in the front, meticulously weeded, filled with hardy desert succulents. I turned off the engine. The silence was absolute. I walked to the gate. A wind chime made of old silverware clattered softly. I knocked on the door. For a long time, there was no answer. I knew she was in there. I could feel it. A magnetic pull in the center of my chest. Go away. A voice called from inside. It was the same voice from the voicemail. Raspy, terrified. We don't want any magazines. I am not selling magazines. I said, my voice was loud in the quiet air. I am Stella. The silence that followed was heavy. Then, the sound of a deadbolt sliding back. Then another lock. Then a chain. The door opened a crack. A face peered out. She looked older than the photos. Her hair was gray, pulled back in a severe knot. Her face was lined with the deep grooves of long-term anxiety, but the eyes were the same. They were my eyes. Wide, dark, and currently filled with a panic so raw it hurt to look at. You came, she whispered. Can I come in? I asked. She hesitated, looking past me at the empty road, scanning for threats. Did you bring her? She asked. No, I said. It is just me. She opened the door. The inside of the house was sparse but clean. It smelled of sage and lemon. There were no photos on the walls. It was the home of someone who did not want to leave a trail. She stood in the middle of the living room, wrapping a knitted cardigan tight around her thin frame. She didn't hug me. I didn't move toward her. We stood 10 feet apart, two strangers sharing the same DNA and the same trauma. You are tall, she said finally. You look like your father. I don't know who he is. I said, Marlene won't say the name. Arthur. She said, his name was Arthur. He wasn't a bad man. He was just weak, and he's dead now. So it doesn't matter. She motioned for me to sit on a beige sofa that looked like it had been bought secondhand. She sat on a wooden rocking chair opposite me, keeping distance between us. I am sorry I called, she said, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. I shouldn't have. It isn't safe. Why isn't it safe? I asked. Marlene is just a socialite. Liana. She is not the mafia. Liana laughed, a dry, brittle sound. Marlene is worse than the mafia, she said. The mafia just breaks your legs. Marlene breaks your reality. I pulled the red binder out of my bag. I placed it on the coffee table. I know about the tax fraud. I said, I know she claimed me as a dependent while using foundation grants to pay for my upkeep. I know she used Carden and Blythe to hide the money. Liana looked at the binder with fear. Is that what you think this is? She asked. Tax fraud? Isn't it? Liana shook her head slowly. Honey, she said, her voice trembling. The tax benefits were a joke. That was just Marlene saving pennies. The real money wasn't in the taxes. It was in the settlement. What settlement? Liana took a deep breath. She looked at her hands. When Arthur found out I was pregnant, she said, he panicked. He was married. He was the CEO of Greystone Maritime. He couldn't have a scandal. But he had a conscience. He wanted the baby to be taken care of. She looked up at me. He set up a trust. Stella, a massive private trust. It was designed to pay out a stipend for your care until you were 18, and then a lump sum. But there was a clause. What clause? I asked. The morality clause. Liana said, Arthur's lawyers put it in if I, the biological mother, was deemed unfit, or if I suffered a mental health crisis that incapacitated me, the control of the trust would transfer to the appointed legal guardian, and the guardian would receive a management fee, a percentage of the corpus. I felt the blood drain from my face. So she didn't just take me. I whispered, she had to make you unfit. Liana nodded. Tears began to well in her eyes. But she didn't wipe them away. I wasn't crazy. Stella, I was 19. I was scared. Marlene told me she would help. She said, let me take the baby for a few months, just until you get on your feet. She shuddered. But every time I tried to get you back, there was a new hurdle, a new inspection, and then the gaslighting started. She would move my things and tell me I lost them. She would tell me I'd forgotten conversations we never had. She convinced the doctors I was delusional. And when you were committed? I asked. That was the payday. Liana said, once I was in Serenity Hills, I was legally incapacitated. The clause triggered. Marlene got full control of the Greystone money. She used it to build the house. She used it to start the foundation. She used it to become the Queen of Fairhaven. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. She needed me sick. Stella, if I got better, if I came back and claimed you, the money stopped. So she made sure I never got better. She kept me in that place for 10 years. I sat there, the horror of it settling over me like a heavy blanket. It wasn't adoption. It wasn't even theft. It was a long con. Marlene had farmed her own sister for capital. She had harvested my childhood for status, and she loved me. I said, my voice cracking. In her own twisted way, she loved me. Liana looked at me with a profound, heartbreaking pity. She owns you. Stella, she said. Marlene doesn't know the difference between love and ownership. To her, you are the most valuable thing she possesses. Of course she takes care of you. You are the proof of her virtue. You are the golden goose. I stood up. The room felt too small for the size of my rage. I am going to end it. I said, no, Liana said, standing up too. She reached out, her hand hovering near my arm but not touching. You can't. She has lawyers. She has judges. She will destroy you. I looked at this woman, my mother, who had been broken so thoroughly that she was afraid of her own shadow. She already destroyed me. I said, she destroyed the person I thought I was. Now there is only the truth left. I reached into the binder. I pulled out a blank sheet of paper and a pen. Write it down. I said, what? Write down what you just told me. I said, about the Greystone Trust, about the clause, about Serenity Hills. Liana backed away, shaking her head. I can't, she whispered. I signed a non-disclosure agreement when they let me out. If I talk, they take my pension. They take this house. I looked at her. If you don't write it, I said, then everything you went through was for nothing. She wins. She keeps the money. She keeps the reputation. And I go on being the girl who was saved by St. Marlene. Liana looked at the paper. She looked at her garden outside. The small, safe life she had built from the wreckage. Then she looked at me. She saw the daughter she had fought for. She saw the letters she had written into the void. She sat down at the table. She picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking, but she pressed the tip to the paper. I sat across from her and watched her write. It took an hour. When she was done, she pushed the paper toward me. It is signed, she said. Liana Hart. I took the paper. I folded it carefully and put it in the binder. Thank you, I said. I hesitated. Then, I reached out and took her hand. It was cold and dry. I will come back, I said. When this is over, I will come back. Liana squeezed my hand. A weak, tentative pressure. Be careful. My star, she whispered. Marlene doesn't fight fair. I drove back to Fairhaven Harbor in a fugue state. The landscape changed from brown to green to gray, the smell of the ocean returning as I neared the coast. I went straight to Dana Mercer's office. It was late, but she was waiting. Kira Mendel was there too, looking exhausted but wired. We have a hearing, Dana said as soon as I walked in. What kind of hearing? I asked, dropping the binder on the desk. The State Charity Oversight Bureau, Dana said, based on the complaint we filed yesterday and the article Kira is publishing tomorrow morning. They have called an emergency session to review the Fairhaven Family Promise Foundation's license. When? Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, Dana said. Marlene will be there. She has to be. She is the honorary patron and the subject of the inquiry. I opened the binder. I took out Liana's statement. I have the missing piece, I said. Dana read the handwritten pages. Her face went still. The Greystone Trust, she murmured. The incapacity clause. This proves motive, Kira said, reading over her shoulder. This proves it wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. It was predatory. Can I speak at the hearing? I asked. Dana looked at me. It is risky, she said. Marlene will have her lawyers there. They will try to discredit you. They will bring up the breakdown narrative she has been planting online. They will say you are vindictive and mentally unwell. I don't care what they say. I said, I want to look her in the eye. The hearing was held in a nondescript government building in the state capital, an hour north of Fairhaven. The room was fluorescent lit and smelled of floor wax. A panel of 3 oversight commissioners sat behind a raised dais. The room was packed. Kira's article had dropped online at 9 in the morning. The headline was devastating. Charity begins at home. How Fairhaven's favorite philanthropist monetized her own family. The gallery was full of reporters, former donors, and the curious elite of Fairhaven who smelled blood in the water. Marlene was there. She sat at the defense table next to a team of expensive lawyers in gray suits. She was wearing white, a calculated choice. She looked frail, noble, a victim of a smear campaign. When she saw me enter, she didn't look angry. She looked heartbroken. She dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. It was a masterclass in performance. The proceedings were dry at first. The commissioners reviewed the tax filings. They asked the current director, Elise Rowan, about the grant structures. Elise sweated, deflected, and blamed legacy systems. Then, they called Marlene Hayes. She stood up. She walked to the podium. She didn't use the microphone. She projected her voice, warm and trembling. Commissioners, she began. I founded this organization to save families. I have dedicated 30 years of my life to the vulnerable. To suggest that I would misuse funds is deeply hurtful. She looked at me in the front row. I took in my niece when no one else would. She said, her voice catching perfectly. I raised her as my own. I loved her. If there were accounting errors in the 90s, they were mistakes made out of desperation to provide a stable home for a child who had been abandoned. There were murmurs of sympathy in the room. She was winning. She was charming them. Dana stood up. The complainant wishes to make a statement, Dana said. The lead commissioner nodded. Ms. Hayes, you may approach. I stood up. I walked to the podium. Marlene had to step aside. We passed each other. She leaned in, her perfume heavy and cloying. You are making a mistake, she whispered. You are embarrassing yourself. I ignored her. I stood at the microphone. I placed the red binder on the stand. My name is Stella Hayes. I said. My voice was not loud, but it was steady, and I was not adopted. The room went silent. Marlene Hayes told the world she adopted me for tax benefits. I continued. She framed it as a joke, but the truth is, she never adopted me because adoption would have severed the financial pipeline she was using to build her empire. I opened the binder. I have here a sworn affidavit from Liana Hart, the biological mother. I said, I have the grant records from the foundation, And I have the transfer documents from the Greystone Maritime Trust. I held up the papers. Marlene Hayes did not save me. I said, she processed me. She utilized a morality clause in a private trust to have my mother declared incapacitated, stripping her of her rights and her child, solely to gain control of the management fees associated with that trust. Objection! Marlene's lawyer shouted. This is hearsay. This is a family dispute, not a regulatory matter. It is a regulatory matter when the vehicle for the fraud was a tax-exempt nonprofit. I said, cutting him off. I turned to the commissioners. She laundered the trust money through the foundation's Guardian Relief Program to hide the source of her income from the IRS. I said, she built her reputation as a philanthropist using money that was legally intended for my care. She didn't give me a life. She charged me for it. Marlene stood up. She couldn't help herself. The mask slipped. She is lying, she screamed. The sound was shrill, ugly. She is unstable. Ask her doctor. She is having a breakdown. I turned to look at her. I am not unstable. Marlene, I said, I am just expensive. And you are finally getting the bill. Marlene rushed toward the podium. Her lawyers tried to grab her, but she shook them off. I saved you, she hissed. Her face contorted with a rage that silenced the room. Your mother was a junkie, a whore. I saved you from the gutter. I made you who you are. The room gasped. The benevolent matriarch was gone. The predator was visible. I waited. I let her scream. I let everyone see it. Then, I pulled the final document from the binder. It was a piece of paper I had found at the very back of Evelyn's box, stuck to the bottom of the envelope. I hadn't shown it to anyone yet, not even Dana. And this, I said, holding up a yellowed piece of letterhead, is a letter from you. Marlene, dated October, 1994, addressed to Carden and Blythe. Marlene froze. I began to read. Regarding the Liana situation, ensure the transfer is finalized before the end of the fiscal year. I need the Greystone capital to secure the loan for the new house. If she resists, threaten the facility. Do whatever it takes. I cannot afford to lose this asset. I looked up. I cannot afford to lose this asset. I repeated. I looked at Marlene. I was the asset, wasn't I? Marlene stared at the paper. Her mouth opened and closed. There was no charm left, no defense. The written proof of her premeditation hung in the air like smoke. She looked at the commissioners, who were staring at her with open shock. She looked at the reporters, who were typing furiously. She sank into her chair. She put her head in her hands. The hearing dissolved into chaos. The commissioners called for a recess. The reporters surged forward. I stepped back from the podium. I didn't stay for the questions. I didn't stay to watch them escort her out. I walked down the center aisle. Jonah was waiting for me at the back doors. He held them open. We walked out into the cool afternoon air. The fallout was slow, then fast. The foundation's license was suspended pending a criminal investigation. The IRS opened an audit into Carden Blythe. Marlene's assets were frozen. The social invitations stopped. The friends vanished. She wasn't in jail yet. White-collar crime takes years to prosecute. But she was in a prison of her own making. She was alone in her big house, surrounded by things she had bought with stolen money, with no one to impress. I didn't move to Oregon. I stayed in Fairhaven. I got a new job at a small firm that designed affordable housing. It paid less, but the buildings were honest. I visited Liana every weekend. We were building a relationship, brick by brick. It was hard work. She was still scared of loud noises. I was still learning how to have a mother who wasn't a manager. But last Sunday, she let me hug her. It lasted for 3 seconds. It was enough. I went to see Marlene one last time. The house was dark. The landscaping crew hadn't been paid, so the hedges were overgrown. She opened the door. She was wearing a bathrobe at 2 p.m. She looked small. You ruined everything, she said. Her voice was flat. I didn't ruin anything. I said, I just turned on the lights. Why? She asked. Why couldn't you just be grateful? Because gratitude is for gifts. Marlene, I said, not for transactions. I took the key to the house, the one she had given me when I was 16, and placed it on the porch railing. I am not your daughter. I said, I am not your deduction. I am just Stella. I walked down the driveway. I didn't look back. I didn't need to check if she was watching. I didn't need to check the mirror for her car. The fear was gone. I got into my car. Jonah was in the passenger seat. Where to? He asked. The future, I said, and for the first time in 33 years, the road ahead belonged to me. Thank you for listening to Stella's story. This was a journey into the dark side of family secrets, and I hope it resonated with you. It is a reminder that the truth, no matter how buried, always has a way of finding the light. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of Stella's choice. Would you have exposed Marlene, or would you have taken the settlement? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice, betrayal, and the complex road to redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments in English. I read every single one. Stay safe, and remember, check your receipts.